Observed today, we had a lengthy committee of the whole city council meeting regarding public safety issues. On whole, I thought the meeting was very productive. I strongly believe in transparency around policing. I believe that there were a number of interesting ideas and suggestions that came out of today's meeting, which we will work with the police department to discuss, and obviously other opportunities for the superintendent and his team to respond to questions that aldermen have. As I mentioned, transparency, I think, is critically important in all aspects of government, not the least of which is around policing. I want to remind the residents of a couple of things. As the superintendent said today, the planning for the summer really started in earnest in January. Those plans accelerated over time. We had our first public safety briefing with aldermen on April 8th. And then again, a month later, on May 4th, there was a joint hearing of public safety and health to talk about other forms of public safety outside of pure law enforcement. And then, as the superintendent said, he endeavors to be in contact with at least 2 different aldermen every week personally. That's not to mention the other myriad ways in which members of the police department at all levels communicate with members of the city council and the public, not the least of which is through CAPS meetings, ComStat, and it's critically important, as you heard other aldermen talk about, to develop a relationship with the district commanders that overlap in the aldermanic wards. The other thing I would say is this: the superintendent every Monday has a stand-up press conference to talk about what happened over the ensuing week and weekend. In addition to that, there are a number of other ways in which he and his command staff are out in the public now more than in 2020 because the public health related restrictions have eased. I want to talk briefly about one issue that came up that I just want to make sure that the facts are accurate. There are a number of aldermen that referenced an email from Susan Lee from 2019, who was a former deputy mayor for public safety. And this email actually came out in July of 2019, about 2 months into our term. Alderman characterized it as Susan Lee's opinion about the efficacy of bond court and so forth. That's not accurate. What the email says is that she is reflecting the comments of others outside of city government and what their reactions were to some of the comments that were made regarding policing. Now, keep in mind, in July of 2019, we had a different superintendent. We're in a different set of circumstances. But I think it's important, if aldermen are going to reference materials, that they characterize them correctly and accurately. And what I heard today is just factually inaccurate based upon the plain language of the email itself. There was a lot of conversation today around electronic monitoring, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that. We are in regular conversation with our partners at the county, namely Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle, State's Attorney Fox, Chief Judge Evans, as well as Sheriff Dart. Myself and the superintendent have been part of conversations that are happening every couple weeks or so. We just had one recently. And we are endeavoring to look to ways in which we can find common ground on the whole range of issues related to public safety, one of which is electronic monitoring. Let me say a little bit more about that. I say this from somebody who's been around law enforcement for a significant amount of my professional career, both as a former federal prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, having served in various roles in the police department and the city as the president of the police board, as well as leading the police accountability task force. What I know is this: Cook County Jail should never be a debtor's prison. And for way too many years, it was. People were incarcerated simply because they literally didn't have $100, $500, whatever it was, to be able to get out on bail. That makes no sense. Incarcerating people who are involved in non-violent crimes also doesn't make any sense. And that part of bail reform, I think there was relatively universal agreement on. Bail reform is not the same thing as who's out on electronic monitoring. The laws are very clear. If you are a danger to the community, or if you are a flight risk, as demonstrated through a bond hearing in front of a judge, and a judge makes a determination, that's where things should happen. Unfortunately, what's happened in here, and particularly over this pandemic year, is there are a number of people that are out on electronic monitoring who frankly are just dangerous. Look, we know from March, April, May of last year that Cook County Jail was a COVID hotspot. There was a rampant increase in the number of COVID cases that were there. Now, we as a city are not responsible for Cook County Jail. Nonetheless, our public health department worked with Sheriff Dart and his staff to provide testing and other guidance on how they could reduce the spread of COVID-19 in Cook County Jail. And we were happy to do that. But as a consequence of that decompression of Cook County Jail and other things that have happened, there was a significant increase in the amount of people that are out on electronic monitoring. And the facts are the facts. Some of those people are dangerous. Now, having said that, obviously we respect due process rights. Every charged defendant has an absolute right to his or her day in court and a presumption of innocence. That is one of the cornerstones of our Constitution and our criminal justice system. However, having said that, I'm basing this on data that was provided by Sheriff Dart as of April 19, 2021. There were, at that time, 573 people out on having been charged with aggravated unlawful use of a weapon. 549 felons in possession out on electronic monitoring. 269 armed habitual criminals out on electronic monitoring. Aggravated battery, 209. Felony theft, 167. Drug manufacturing and delivery, 166. Robbery, 164. Felony drug possession, 160. DUI, 142. Non-residential burglary, 118. Criminal sexual assault, 104. Driving a revoked or suspended license, 100. And murder, 91. My rough math is several thousand people out on electronic monitoring that are charged with crimes of violence and danger. And I think if we deconstructed who some of these folks are, we would see that there was history there. One other thing that I want to make sure that I also lift up, and you heard this from the superintendent and you heard it from many of the aldermen. Every single day, our men and women of the police department run into danger. We've seen an unprecedented level of people shooting at the police last year and still this year. Now, I'm the first to say, because I believe it to be true, we have to absolutely hold our officers to the highest possible standard of accountability. If they don't have legitimacy because they are doing things to harm members of the public, that undermines any effort around public safety and legitimacy of policing, and it makes communities less safe. So there has to be accountability. But accountability works in multiple ways. And we all have a role to play in that accountability. And I think it's important as we think about public safety that we don't think about it as one little slice of it. We have to think about it as the entire ecosystem that it is. And every part of that ecosystem, including residents, including community-based organizations, including the courts, the prosecutors, and law enforcement, we all have a role to play, and we've all got to step up. Yes, we've made progress this year. Not enough. Not enough. No one can be satisfied until we see dramatic drops in homicides and in shootings. But that means we also have to have our federal partners step up. And you've heard me say this before, and then I'll stop and take your questions. It is incredibly gratifying to have a partner in the White House who understands the appropriate and unique role that the federal government has to play in public safety at the local level. For 4 years, we were ignored over and over again. I started raising these issues from the moment that I became mayor. We needed more help from our federal partners. We have too many crime guns on our street. You heard the superintendent today say that at the pace that we're on, the Chicago Police Department is going to take 12,000 crime guns off the streets just this year alone, which will be double New York and LA combined. Double. Not because we have a better strategy, although I think we have a good strategy. It's because there's too many guns on our streets. Who can help with that? The federal government can and must. And President Biden just last week announced a series of initiatives that myself and other mayors have been arguing for several years to make sure that federally licensed gun dealers are held accountable for who they're selling to. We know, unfortunately, the rate, sale to crime guns, 3 years or less in many instances. Federally licensed gun dealers have to be held accountable to who they're selling to. And I'm glad that the Biden administration is going to provide more resources to the ATF and empower them to do the work that they should have been doing all along, but we're there. The other thing that I think is encouraging is the Biden administration's embrace, again, of something that I called for, other mayors have called for, which is to have multi-jurisdictional task forces working on gun trafficking, one of which will be based here in Chicago. I'll stop there and happy to take your questions.
Great.
Mayor, you did say on hold the meeting was productive, but
Yes.
on Wednesday, when this meeting was called, you said it was driving a political wedge. And yet we heard a lot of aldermen also talk today saying it was good. Do you regret throwing that political bomb out there?
No, and it wasn't a political bomb. It was a question that you asked. You asked me if there were some shenanigans involved with the setting of this meeting, and there were. There's no question about it. Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that I think we had a very productive conversation today. I think we did. But as I mentioned, the Friday of the deadliest weekend of the year, to have our superintendent and his senior leadership team be in City Hall for, 6 hours, something along that line, when they could and should have been out, making sure the deployments were set, making sure that they were giving the charges to the troops on the ground that are going to be doing the hard work and the heavy lifting. As my mother would say, there's a time and a place for everything. It's not that the conversation shouldn't happen. Of course it should. But what's the timing of that? We could have done this last week. We could have done it the week before. And you'll find that some of the very signatories demanding this meeting haven't participated in other opportunities that are readily available to them as members of the City Council. That's the concern. Now, I do think we had a productive conversation today, and I hope we have productivity moving forward.
One of the notable absences today was Alderman Carrie Austin. Mm-hmm. Do you intend to strip her of her chairmanship or ask her to resign from that chairmanship?
Well, I've reached out to Alderman Austin. We have not had the opportunity to speak yet. But I've been very clear about this from the beginning of my tenure as mayor. I believe that it's having been a prosecutor, but also been a criminal defense attorney. When you have the sword of Damocles hanging over your head with a federal indictment, particularly one arising from your alleged dealings as an alderman, I think it's very difficult to be effective as a member of this body. She and I will have a conversation, and until then, that's really all I have to say at this point.
Mayor, to the point you were making before, I read that you agree with Superintendent Brown that the city was more dangerous or in danger because he was answering questions for 6 hours here?
I hope not. I hope not. But I'm concerned for sure. This is a very challenging weekend, historically going back decades. Do I think that the time could have been used in a different way that would have added to public safety? Yes, I do. Do I think that the questions that were legitimate questions that were asked today could have been asked earlier and at a different time, in a different forum? Do I wish that aldermen would have availed themselves of the numerous outreach and briefing opportunities, really starting formally back in April? Of course.
And regarding the electronic monitoring program and the no cash bail, you are saying that a lot of dangerous people are in the street, but do you agree with the superintendent that it's one of the causes of the increased violence we have in the city?
Well, I think a couple things about that, and I want to keep the two issues separate because they're not the same. Bail reform, making sure that only people who are a demonstrated danger to the community and only a demonstrated flight risk are incarcerated, that's a different question. But when, as I read, the lead charges that some of these folks have, which are eye-raising and concerning, that so many people with those charges, and many of them have extensive criminal histories. I'm not sitting in those courtrooms making those calls as a judge, but I have serious concerns about it, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, under the Cook County, and the numbers that I read are just the sheriff's EM program, by the way. We've asked repeatedly for information from Chief Judge Evans about the electronic monitoring program that's run by the court. For whatever reason, there are two separate programs. I don't know why. Frankly, it doesn't make sense to me, but there are two separate programs, one by the by Cook County Sheriff and one by the court. And we don't really have any visibility into the court's EM system. But what I would say is this. When police officers literally risk life and limb to arrest dangerous people and convince the state's attorney to charge serious offenses, not petty crimes, but serious offenses, and then to see those individuals back on the street within 24 or 48 hours released to electronic monitoring, it does the following thing. In Cook County, if you are an EM, you are free to go about your business from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That superintendent used the word explosion, but that substantial increase from about 1,200 in February of 2020 to over 5,000 by May of 2020, that didn't come with any additional services. It didn't come with any other additional supports for that population. It didn't come with any additional people monitoring that significant increase in the EM population. That's a problem. Now, it's not the city of Chicago's problem to bear, but we're going to. We're going to step up. We're going to provide more resources because I think there's an opportunity to turn people away from a life of crime, but you've actually got to reach out to them and try to intervene. Now, some folks won't take that support, but for example, I asked the chief judge, as part of the order of release, require them to engage with community-based resources that are available for them to help support them. I'd still like to see that as part of the standard release order, that these individuals must be monitored, and one way in which to do it is through community-based organizations that I know are ready, willing, and able to step up and provide supports. And as a city, again, it's not our responsibility, but we're willing to put money behind it so that we can provide those kind of resources to these county pretrial releasees. The other issue, though, is this. Aside from the morale of the police, when somebody has shot up a neighborhood and they're released on bond or electronic monitoring within 24 or 48 hours of being arrested, what message does that send to the victims? A lot of times when we have these discussions, the rights of the victims gets lost in the shuffle. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen. Go ahead.
I guess the question is if you can link these people being freed to new cases, to new shootings.
Yes, I mean, I think the superintendent gave several examples today. One of the shooters who killed Jasmine Adams, the 7-year-old in the McDonald's. There are a number of instances. The individual who was on EM who fled, went to Ohio, and tried to shoot, I think, state troopers there, and ended up getting extradited back. There's a long list. Now, we can agree to disagree on many things, but the fact of the matter is there are people who are out on electronic monitoring. One of the most, I won't say favorite, but one of the most interesting stories was someone who was out on electronic monitoring who had figured out how to jerry-rig the juice for their ankle bracelet into a cigarette charger and was caught with a weapon on Lakeshore Drive. That was last summer. So there's plenty of evidence that there's an issue. Someone brought up the issue today of folks who are AWOL. I've heard Sheriff Dart say that he's got 1,000 people that he can't account for who've cut their ankle bracelets and we don't know where they are. So there's a flaw in this system. We need to work together to fix it, but we've got to acknowledge that there's a problem, because it is no question in my mind driving some of the surge in violence that we've seen in the city.
Mayor
Yes, sir.
Lightfoot, William Kelly with Newsmax. Last week, I asked you about Chicago's out-of-control shootings and murders. You said that crime was down. That weekend, we had 70-plus shootings. Last night alone, we had 30-plus shootings. Do you still believe that crime in Chicago is down?
So what I said to you last week, what the superintendent said today over and over again, and what the data tells us is this. When you look at homicides and shootings from April, May, and June, we are trending downward. Is anybody satisfied with where we are? No. But the data is the data, and it is absolutely trending down. And I know from my conversations with other mayors across the country, every major city in the United States since 2020 is seeing a surge in violence. New York, LA, Atlanta, DC, across the board. But what we are seeing here in Chicago is a downward trend, both in homicides and in shooting. Again, are we satisfied? Because what you're saying is, hey, wait, there was a shooting someplace in our neighborhood. Yeah, there are shootings. But what we're seeing in the data is a year-over-year, month-over-month decline, and that is progress. Yes, sir.
Comparing last night's 30-plus shootings to last year, when we had an out-of-control race riot in which almost every member of the city of Chicago was, in fact, a victim, seems to be playing with those numbers just a little bit. Last night, I think you were on Chicago Tonight. You said that 99.9% of the criticism of you is because you're a black woman. Do you honestly believe that, considering the way the city council, the city council of Chicago is obviously made up of many black women who criticize you? Do you really believe that the criticism of you is 99.9% based on the fact that you're a black woman?
So you said about 15 things, most of which were wrong. So let's deconstruct some of that. We didn't have race riots last summer. That's
it was 100%.
no. You're wrong, sir. You're wrong. You're wrong. And I know that you like to be controversial.
I don't like
but
it.
no, you do.
I don't like what's happening.
Sir, are you going to let me answer? Or are you just going to keep talking like you did the last time?
Please do.
We're allowing you in here. I would like you to follow the same. I would like you to follow the same courtesy and rules that every other member of the press does. I know you have political aspirations. I know those political aspirations haven't been fulfilled. You're a failed political candidate over and over again. But what you don't have the right to do is make up facts. We did not have race riots in our city last year. That's just wrong. And again, yeah, that's wrong. And it's incendiary. Now, I know that's what Newsmax likes to do, but I'm not going to let you take liberty with the facts. Not in front of me. You're not going to get away with that. So let's go to the next question.
So you're not going to answer my question?
I answered your question. Your question, frankly, was insulting. You said race riots. You said you conflated the fact that there are members of color on the city council, and that somehow I don't have a right to say, as a black woman, as a lesbian, that I don't believe, my belief that some of the criticism is based solely on the basis of my gender and my race. That's my personal.
99.9%.
That's my personal opinion, sir. You don't have a right to criticize my personal opinion. So I think I've answered your question as best I can, and now we're moving on. Yes,
Mayor,
sir.
as far as the fireworks show tomorrow night,
I'm sorry?
concerning the fireworks show
Yeah.
tomorrow night, any concerns not only about the spread of COVID, but the potential for a shooting when you're attracting these large crowds to the lakefront?
Well, first of all, there are going to be large crowds at the lakefront, regardless. The weather's going to be warm. The city is open. And so that's why we have plans for that. We have significant deployment of resources along the lakefront. We've been working with local aldermen to address those issues, but the planning for 4th of July has been in process for quite some time. We are not going to have a fireworks show that is specifically attracting crowds to a particular location. So that's really important. The fireworks are going to be able to be seen from fairly far north to fairly far south, but we're not having people gather in a particular location as we would in ordinary circumstances. I'm concerned about shootings every single day. I go to bed thinking about it. I wake up in the morning thinking about it and making sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our community safe. So we have, I think, a very robust plan. But fundamentally, here's the issue. There are too many guns and too little accountability. But we've got to do what we can to make sure that our communities are, in fact, feeling safe, because there is real safety. And as you heard over and over again today throughout the lengthy discussion on City Council floor, it's up to all of us. Not one person, not one organization. It's up to all of us.
We also learned just recently that Inspector General Joe...
I'm sorry, sir. I'm having a very difficult time hearing you.
So we just learned that Joe Ferguson will be stepping down at the end of his term in October. Just curious to get your reaction to that. I'm wondering, when's the last time you spoke with the inspector, and how you would rate the job he did?
Well, I learned of his resignation during the middle of the City Council meeting today. He sent me an email with his resignation letter. I think Joe Ferguson has done tremendous work over his 12-year tenure as an Inspector General, and I appreciate his decision to move on. We thank him for his service, and we will follow the ordinance for finding a successor to him. Hi there, how are you?
I'm all right. There's been a lot of back and forth about the Bears. Can you tell us exactly what you're negotiating with the team over, and when's the last time your team spoke with their team?
We are in frequent contact with the Bears, and I personally saw George McCaskey at an event here in the last 2 weeks, and again offered to him that it's important that we sit down, but our teams have been talking all along.
What do they want exactly?
Well, I'm not going to negotiate here, and frankly, I'm not sure exactly what they want. But we are open to the conversation. I think it's important. Obviously, they are the Chicago Bears. They're not the Arlington Heights or Schaumburg or suburban Bears. They're Chicago Bears. They have a home season played at Soldier Field. I think overall what I will say is, and I say this as much as the mayor, but also as a 20-plus year season ticket holder of the Chicago Bears, that there is some interest in improving the fan experience at Soldier Field, in them being able to maximize the profitability of the stadium, and I'm totally supportive of that.
There's one more. Oh, no, my question was about Joe Ferguson as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. All right. Have a safe and fun 4th of July, everyone. Take care.